If you always wanted to make mead but thought it was just far too intimidating, you need far too much stuff, it's just far too complicated, well, guess what? We're going to break that myth right now and show you a really easy way to make your very first mead.
To make this mead, you're going to need a vessel. This vessel used to hold apple juice. That's right, you can find a 1 gallon glass fermentation vessel in your very own grocery store.
We actually got it at Publix. We bought the fermenter and got a gallon of apple juice for free.
You're also going to need honey. Today we're going to be using orange blossom honey, but you can use wildflower honey, you can use clover honey, you can use pretty much any honey you can find at your grocery store, as long
as it's really honey. Some of them are not so much. You want to make sure it's genuine honey. Raw honey is a great way to go if it says raw, or 100% pure if you're in the United States. That, I think, is the nomenclature that they use. You will also need a cup of black tea, the black tea of your choice. And please use black tea. Don't use green tea, don't use ginger tea, don't use sassafras tea, don't use lavender tea, just use black tea. For this, just use black tea. There's a reason why I'm being so animated about that. I've been asked a million times, can I just use this? The reason you use tea in this recipe is not for flavor, okay? It is merely to add a little bit of mouthfeel and complexity to this brew. You want the black tea, that's what's gonna give you the best at that. Just use it, trust me. Also, some other little things that you can add are, I like to add a little bit of a citrus flavor. Now this is already a citrusy style honey, so it makes sense. You can use a swath of orange peel, lemon peel if you want to, lime peel if you really want to, but be careful, lime adds weird flavors to honey sometimes. I am going to be using dried orange peel that we dried ourselves, so it's all good. It's just little tiny peelings of it, and we put it in teas and things like that. I'm gonna be using some of it in our mead today. You're also going to need Fleischmann's active dry yeast. Don't have Fleischmann's? Have something else? Go ahead and give it a try. However, I will tell you, this particular bread yeast will give a more consistent result than most of the others on the market, and that is from hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of input via our audience and from our own experience. Now, before anybody gets out there and says, oh, bread yeast can't make good mead. Okay, this is your first mead. I don't want you to have to go buy expensive stuff. Can you do better with wine yeast? Yes, it will probably be better in some ways. What's the downside to using bread yeast in a mead? Well, for one, it won't what we call flocculate as well. What that means is at the end of a fermentation, all the stuff falls out and goes to the bottom. It doesn't stack as neat when you use bread yeast. You'll get little wispies and things. Do they hurt you? No. Do they actually affect the flavor? No. In some ways, bread yeast can make a superior tasting product to wine yeast of a similar vintage. We've done videos on that. There's proof, and we've tested it time and time again. A lot of people are going to hate me for that, and I will fight them. I will argue with them. Bread yeast makes a perfectly fine product. After all, Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the same yeast all over the place, and that is what bread yeast, ale yeast, mead yeast, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same species of yeast. They're just bred to do slightly different things. Get it? What I did there? Bred to do different things. Yeah.
The final ingredient you will need is raisins.
The most contentious of mead ingredients ever, if there was one. Now, there's some myth, there's some tradition, and just plain old why not in using raisins. First, I want to be clear, raisins are not truly a significant source of nutrition for yeast, okay? Yeast do need some nutrition aside from the honey itself. That said, they will actually happily produce alcohol the whole time. Just might not taste so great, might need more time to age, but it can be just as good. However, in winemaking, people use grapes, right? So the idea is that if grapes produce enough nutrition to make a wine, then dried grapes should be good for mead. Well, it's sort of true, but sort of not. You know, that's where some of the myth comes in. However, I'm going to be using 2 ounces. You got to use a significant amount. This is not like 5 raisins thrown into a thing. This is about 50 or 100. It might have been like 150 raisins. I don't know. I didn't actually count the raisins. I counted the amount. 2 ounces. Why did I use 2 ounces? Because 4 ounces looked like too much, but I really wanted to use 4 ounces because I thought it would be better. There is a little bit of nutrition in these guys. Not a lot. There's a little bit of sugar in these guys too, but what there also is flavor and tannins. Now, tannins are going to come from the tea as well. They are a different kind of tannins. This will add a little bit of complexity, a little bit of color, and a little bit of extra flavor to this mead.
A richness and a depth that would be absent with their absence.
So as much as this is a simple mead, there's a lot of complex things going on here, and I just want to make it clear that once you see how we do this, this is super easy. And before anybody says you talk too much, I would rather you understand what we're doing than just go, throw this in, and you're done. No, I want you to understand it, because if you want to get into this hobby, this is a great starting point, but I want you to understand what you're getting into and what you're actually doing and why. That way, when you do go further in this hobby, you actually understand a little bit better of what's going on.
The final ingredient you will need is water, and the most important part of that water is that it's non-chlorinated.
And it's off camera. It's over there. I'll get it when we need it. The table's getting kind of full, but it's water. Yes, as she said, you want non-chlorinated. We do use filtered tap water, which has all the chlorine and stuff removed. If you cannot find anything like that, or your tap water tastes like, a swimming pool, I would buy filtered water. Any filtered water is going to be fine. Try not to use distilled water that has all the minerals and nutrients removed from it. Probably not the best thing for making mead with. But anyway, let's get started. You'll also probably want a scale. They tend to be helpful. We are going to be doing things in mostly imperial units today, simply because that's what we have and that's what most of our stuff is made of, so I'm very sorry. But first thing I want to do is try to jam all of those raisins into this bottle.
Brian did chop these raisins.
Oh yeah, these are chopped up pretty fine. Because that's another thing. A lot of people say, oh, raisins don't work. Well, here's the thing. If the yeast can't really get to the nutrients inside them, then no, they're not going to. So I like to chop them up a bit. And you know what? If it doesn't actually do anything, it makes me feel better.
It increases their surface area, and it makes them easier to get into here.
Yep. Easier, not easy. This is probably the most frustrating and time-consuming portion of the entire making of this mead. In all honesty, I don't use raisins in a lot of my meads anymore because we do put other things in them, so we don't need the extras. We already have the flavorants, we already have the tannins. One thing we haven't really spoken about much is sanitation, and it's really important that you wash all of these things well and use something like a Star San or some kind of cleaner. If you really can't do that, boiling them, just like you would for canning preservation, will work just fine. All of our stuff has been sanitized in
the red bucket of sanitization,
including the funnel, the fermenter, everything. This wasn't because, well, you know what? It was boiling. But these, which we're going to use to get a reading, an optional step, but one I highly recommend. If this is your very, very first mead and you own none of the gear, don't bother about the hydrometer or anything like that yet. We'll get to that another time. At this point, the order of events is important for a couple of reasons. If I put the yeast in now and then poured hot tea on top of it, I could kill my yeast. If I pour water in now and then try putting honey in, honey will be stuck in my funnel. So it's very important to do things in this order. I'm going to take this and put it on my scale, totally obfuscating my face. Then I'm going to put in my honey. Oh, look at that, brand new bottle. And like we said, this is an orange blossom honey. You could use clover, you could use wildflower, whatever you like. I wouldn't go with something like buckwheat or anything really heavy for my first mead. Those are harder flavors to work with, so you might not actually really like the end product. Best to use something a little more neutral, a little more generic. So I'm going to use 3 pounds of this honey, which is about 1.6 kilograms. Okay, 3 pounds of honey is in there. Now, many of you who are getting into this probably realize that the fermentables, the honey that you put in there, is what gauges how much alcohol you have. Well, your yeast does too. So do me a favor, please, for this one recipe, don't be tempted to put in more honey than what I suggested. I put in a lot of honey for the yeast that we're using. It's going to create about 12% alcohol. If you want to have more alcohol, drink 2 glasses. Honey is very thick, very sticky stuff. If you didn't heat the bottle ahead of time, like I didn't, you probably have a whole ton of honey up in this funnel, but it's been weighed, so it needs to get into your brew. An easy way, I'm going to take this tea right here, and I'm just going to hold the edge of the tea bag so it doesn't fall in, even though it wouldn't matter all that much. And this is still hot. It's been steeping for, maybe 10 minutes, just as long as we've been talking through this video. And I'm just going to drizzle it down the sides, rinsing it off, melting it down. Okay. At this point, I'm going to try to jam some of these guys in. If you have fresh lemon peel or orange peel or whatever you happen to be using, you could probably do this a lot easier. Probably using, if I was using fresh, it might be like, I don't know, a quarter of an orange, half an orange worth of peel. And some people will say it doesn't do anything. I think it adds just that little extra something that's difficult to determine, but if it wasn't there, you might miss it. All right, so now that we've got most everything in there, the last thing is the water. Now, if I put all the water in, it'll be hard to mix this up. So I'm gonna put half the water in right now. I'll put my funnel in with the water for the moment because it's okay. Now, I have what I call my thumb saver bung. What this is a solid stopper. If you don't have one, it's okay. You can use the cap that came with this. You can, whatever you got to do. You want to just put something in there so that it keeps it from coming out. And then you shake the bejesus out of it. What do I mean by shake the bejesus out of it? What I mean is get all that stuff mixed together. As you're doing that, you're adding oxygen into that must, which is necessary for the yeast. In the very beginning of fermentation, after a couple weeks, you do not want to introduce more oxygen. A very simple rule of thumb for shaking in honey into mead. If you think you're done, shake for 2 more minutes. Okay, now, as you look at this, does it look like it did before? No, you are seeing a lighter color due to oxygenation. A lot of oxygen got into there. That's a good thing. We want that. Now, what I'm gonna do, add more water. Be careful how much water you put in because you don't want to fill it all the way up into the neck. Some expansion and some foam will happen from fermentation. Don't get too greedy. Go to about here-ish or so. Just at the shoulder is good for me. Okay, the liquid is to about the shoulder. The foam, however, quite a bit higher. That mildly concerns me, but not that much. What I would like to do now, though, is you have an option. You can put the yeast in right now and then take a reading, or take a reading, then put in the yeast. Either way, it doesn't matter because we're using the yeast straight away. We're just putting it right in. Today, just because of all the foam and everything going on, I think I'm gonna do it right out of the bottle. I'm gonna do it now. Now, when I say take a reading, this is that optional step. Why do we do readings? Mostly to know how much alcohol we're gonna get, where it is, what is the gravity? It's a density of sugars to water. What gravity means, it's way too much for this video. We actually have another video explaining that. But it talks about how to know how much fermentation has occurred. And at the end of fermentation, that reading is actually more important because that'll tell you, is your mead done? Is it stuck? Is it dry? Is it sweet? It gives you an idea in a numerical value of what sweetness level you have or what dryness level you have. What do I use for readings? A turkey baster, also known as a poor man's wine thief. Nothing wrong with this. This does the same job as those really expensive stainless and glass ones for like, I don't know, pennies on the dollar. A hydrometer, which is made for doing this exact thing. It's a triple scale. Do not get confused with an alcohol meter. Some people have done that and it's not the right thing. And I'm just using a plain old graduated cylinder. All in all, the equipment that we have here could be bought for 30 bucks. I mean, it's not that expensive. And hey, you get a gallon of free apple juice. That can be made into cider, but that's another show. One thing that's important, once you add more water in, make sure you shake it up again, just to make sure that it's completely homogeneous throughout. On our reading, I got a 1.110 original gravity. Now, what does that really mean? Well, each pound of honey that you add into a gallon of must is about 0.035 specific gravity. If you do not understand the specific gravity scale at all, we do have videos on that. It's far too much for me to go into this video here because this is supposed to be simple. Some people will tell you, don't do this. I'm going to disagree with those people because everything that we did here has been sanitized. Everything is clean. There's absolutely no reason to waste that little bit of must. Just no reason at all. Now we move on to the most contentious portion of this video. A lot of people will tell you that you cannot use bread yeast. And that comes from, there's a whole elitism in mead making and in brewing in general, and I don't agree with it. And it makes me a little bit of an outlier, but you know what? I don't care. I've made a lot of good mead, a lot of great wines, and a lot of ciders and beers with bread yeast. This exact one, Fleischmann's. I think a lot of the myth comes from, there are some bread yeast that are not good to brew with. I don't actually know what they are, but I know that some of the Red Star ones can be anywhere from 3% to 15 or 16%, depending on the brew, depending on the batch of product that you got.
But our rule when we coming up with this recipe was things that you can find in your grocery store. We know you
Right.
can get bread yeast in your grocery store, where wine yeast you probably cannot.
Right. And I used this one because it's the one that was in my grocery store. I use it for baking bread, and I started out all of my brewing with it. Works just fine. We're going to use a teaspoon today. And the exact amount isn't critical. Don't get crazy if you use a little bit over, a little bit under. I'm just going to dump it right in.
Now we used a dry funnel because this
It'll
is a
just
big,
stick.
sticky, wet mess right now. And that way our yeast just went boop, right in.
I'm just going to give this a swirl. At this point, you now have what is called a must for mead. Okay? There's nothing else that you need to add to this. There's nothing else you really need to do it except put some sort of a cap on there. Now, if you do not have a bung and an airlock and don't want to buy one yet, you can just use the cap that came with this. And here's what you do. We have actually thrown that cap away because we don't use them. But here is what you do. You put it on tight, loosen it just a little bit until it'll rattle ever so slightly on that. That will allow gases to escape. If you put it on too tight, it will blow up. I am not even kidding. It will blow up. Flying glass, not a good thing. Never mind the sticky mess that you have to clean up afterwards. If you put it on too loose, it is possible that bugs could get in. So find that happy medium where it's just slightly movable. You should be fine, okay? If you really get nervous about it every day, just give it a little loosen and put it back. You should be just fine.
If you are willing to spend a couple of bucks for this upgrade that we're going to show you next, then by all means do so.
That upgrade is this. It is a rubber stopper with an airlock. Altogether, a few dollars at a brew store or through Amazon. We do have links below for some of this stuff if you feel enterprising and want to try it out. To use it, very simple. Stick it in there. And that's it. We
You
also
fill
put
it, to its halfway mark. There's a little indicator there with sanitization liquid. You don't want to use just water, and you don't want to use rubbing alcohol. Please do not do that.
Yeah.
If you don't have sanitization liquid, then you can just use a neutral spirit like vodka.
if you have a particular scotch that you just don't like. That's what I do. Okay, what to do with this next? This is going to go sit somewhere in a room temperature, between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The Celsius will be here because I just don't know it off the top of my head. Relatively dark place. Like, you don't want to put it in a windowsill. You don't want light on it all the time. Even natural light or even artificial light, not the best for it. Will it hurt it directly? Probably not, but you know what? Better safe than sorry. A bathtub is a great place to keep it. You don't want it too cold. You don't want it too hot either. That will alter the way the fermentation takes place and change the characteristics of what the yeast will give in flavor. That's important. We don't make this just to make alcohol. We make this to taste good. So, give it everything that you can. Make it as easy as possible. Being that this is your first mead, I know you don't have all this extra stuff and you've never done this and this is a scary thing, and it's okay because this is done now. It just has to sit for a few weeks. When I say a few weeks, give it a month. 5 weeks, 6 weeks, there's absolutely no harm for sitting longer. However, if you try drinking this in 2 weeks, you just might end up with a little bit of bloat and gas and other uncomfortable issues.
Digestional distress.
Yeah, however, it's not actually dangerous. Okay. So,
What to expect?
while it's fermenting, you will see this foam go up. It might stick to the top here. It might get all brown and crusty. You will see bubbles coming up the sides. If you don't see any of that in the first 4 days, add more yeast. A different yeast, probably, because the yeast you used was probably dead because you haven't made bread in about 1.5 years and it's still sitting in your fridge. If you used an airlock, you will see activity in here, and that's a sign that fermentation is starting to occur. It should be the side closest to this tube should be low, and the side furthest away should be high because the water is pushing through, kind of like an S-trap in your sink. Other things to look for. If you see very oddly colored things, which is highly unlikely, green, blue things
Black.
with hair, throw it away.
Yeah.
Just dump it all out, boil everything, bleach everything if you have to. That's bad. In all my years of brewing, I've never seen it, so don't even really worry. I just wanted to get that little safety reminder out there for you.
If you see white little blobs or off-white little blobs on the top, it's probably just yeast rafts, which is normal and common and nothing to worry about.
What you want to do if you do see that, to know if it's yeast rafts or mold, give it a shake. Don't take the airlock out. Just shake it all up real good. And if they go away and don't come back, it was yeast rafts. If it comes back, could be mold. Okay, so that is the basics of this, and that would lead us on to the next step.
And we're back with my first mead.
This is about 7 weeks old at this point. We started it on June 3rd. We started it on June 3rd, 2020. Today is July 28th, 2020. So yeah, it's about 7 weeks. I'm still watching little bubbles coming up. I'm still seeing a little bit of airlock activity. So we just want to give this a check, see how it's doing, see if it's time to rack. It probably is not, but we're going to take a look anyway. It does look a little hazy still, which means it's not totally cleared. Not surprising. 7 weeks, you know.
Also, this was under the desk of fermentation, which is 2-3 rooms that away. So just transporting it here kind of swirls stuff up a little bit.
Yeah, the lease is not real stable because this was bread yeast. That is one of the issues with using bread yeast. And you'll see like a wavering at the bottom. But let's just see what this did. Did really well. It's a 1026. So let me just write that down real quick while it's fresh in my head. And what that is a 1.026 gravity. I'm just going to pour a little bit off while I have it here. It's relatively clear. I know I always said it's hazy, but it's actually not that bad. Let me just do a quick calculation and see what our alcohol percentage is at so far. It's at 11.34, 11.3, which, being that this is Fleischmann's yeast, this might be done, but we don't actually know yet. This is the first reading we've taken, so I'd like to let this sit for another week and see how it does, which means I'm just going to take a little sniff and a taste. We're going to pour this right back in. Let's just do this now. I'm going to pour this right back in here, and we'll put the airlock back on, the bung back on, because it could be done. It could also still need a little bit more. So what I'd like to do is just put the airlock and everything back on, give it a couple more weeks, give it another check, and if it doesn't change, then we know it's done. Okay, so it's been about 2 weeks. Now we're going to take a reading and see if it's ready to rack. Note the rubber band holding the airlock in place. As usual, hydrometer, graduated cylinder, poor man's wine thief. Now I want to be careful to not disturb the lees. This is a bread yeast fermentation, so it's got a lot of very volatile, wispy lees. That is the downside.
Wispies. It's a technical term.
Yeah, that's the downside to using bread yeast. So when we left this last, it was 1.026. 1.026 on the nose. Yay. Beautiful. That means we can rack this. But I want to taste it too. You can tell by the size pour that I do how much I think we're going to like it. So something that comes up a lot is people talk about headroom when racking, and they wonder, how do I take care of that? Well, we have an assortment of different size vessels. We have the regular 1 gallon small mouth fermenter. We have the 1 gallon wide mouth fermenter that's actually a little smaller. Yeah, gallon. It's a little smaller than this one. And then this is a 3 liter. This is actually a Carlo Rossi Sangria bottle, I think. And the airlocks and everything fit in them nicely, so we really like to use that just in case. This one, because you can see it's already down a little bit below the shoulders, and I know there's a significant amount of lees. I'm thinking 3 liters is good, plus if there's any extra, you know, we'll just drink it. But I'm going to put this up on Wibble, which is the white bucket of levitation. And the reason for that is when you're using a siphon, you want to make sure that your source is higher than your destination. Okay. It is a very important thing right now for me to not put this all the way to the bottom of this fermenter because I will disturb that lees and I do not want to. This is the downside to using bread yeast, okay? So I'm just going to put it about there and I'm going to try to get this started. Small strokes sometimes works a little bit better. I don't like to do it that way though. So here we go. I'm just going to hold that in there. We just had somebody, I just read their comment, where they said that they just racked this, which made me a little curious because we're just racking it now, which means they racked it before we did, but they made it after we did because our video came out before they would have made it from our recipe, right? So was this ready to rack a week ago? Maybe. I don't know. But it doesn't hurt to let it sit a little longer. But their problem was they got all the little bits up in their siphon. They probably took that siphon and shoved it all the way to the bottom, thinking that that cap was going to protect them. Well, sometimes you got to use a little bit of, you got to look at what's going on and judge it for yourself. I mean, obviously, if I just jam this all the way to the bottom, it's going to suck up everything down there. Not a good thing.
You got to use some finesse.
Now, being that this is the first rack, you can rack this again if you get too much of the sediment in there, and that's not a problem. You just lose a little bit more product every time you rack. I do see a distinct line of wispy in there that's just never going to settle out. I'm hoping to not suck up too much of it, but we're racking it, so it'll settle out again anyway. It's perfectly fine. But I do want to get as much as possible because this is good stuff. Don't be fooled into thinking that just because this is a very simple mead, that it doesn't taste good. If you watch any of our videos, you know that simple sometimes is the best ones. Okay, I went as far down as I possibly could. We're down to that, but it's pretty much lease at that point. And wow, glad I didn't let it go too much further because we weren't watching and it filled it all the way to the neck here. So what'll happen to this now? This is going to go into what I call conditioning or secondary phase, where it's going to clear out a little bit more sediment's going to fall to the bottom. Any little bits that might have gotten up in there, they're going to fall out, and it's going to begin to mellow and age. And it's just going to get better with time. How long? Don't really know, but I'll probably let this sit until it's clear, then bottle it. But for now, let's take a taste, shall we? On the smell, it's honey. Tiny bit of citrus, just like expected, because, you know, we put a little bit of citrus in there.
It has a little bit of that youth to it because it has some of the alcohol forward notes, which normally after aging blends and mellows through better.
When I breathe out, I get that little bit.
But this is not bad.
Oh no, this is good.
Yeah.
This is very nice. If you've ever had most commercial meads that you can buy in the store, this is better. Plain and simple, this is better than most of the stuff you can buy in the stores. It, with age, will be even better. And I mean age like another couple of months. It doesn't need years like some people think. A couple of months, this is actually going to be really, really nice. We'll probably bottle it in a month or two and then let it age some more in the bottle. And we might do like a 1-year tasting of this or something. But see you in a couple of weeks when we bottle. Okay, so we started this a while ago, like almost 3 months ago, okay? And it's been racked. It's been sitting for a while. We tasted it and it was good. So today we're going to put it in bottles and let it age some more. Really simple. You've seen this before too. Now you might even say, how come you're not taking a reading? Because we don't need to. We tested this, a month ago, and it was 1.026. We tested it a couple weeks later. It was 1.026. That's perfectly fine. We racked it at that point, so we know that this is all good. There was absolutely no activity in the airlock of any kind. There was no indications to make me think that this was anything but a perfectly stilled and stable brew. As always, when we go to bottle, we use an auto siphon. We put the wand on the end. Now, somebody actually sent us a bottling wand, a really nice one, a metal one, and it was beautiful. Here's the problem. It was too big. It doesn't fit the tubing that we use for this auto siphon. It might fit when we do the big 5-gallon ones, but it doesn't actually fit this one. It was PC Gamer, I remember the name because I've seen him comment before. So thank you for sending that. The problem is we can't actually use it most times. And I just want to put this on about a ½ inch. That way I can get it back off later. And as always, what we want to do is drop one of these down into the bottle. Derek is going to hold the bottle steady while I get the auto siphon up and into this.
I'm pushing the bottling wand down so that the spring is activated.
Like I said, this is one of our 3-liter Carlo Rossi bottles. They don't really allow a lot of manipulation inside there. But there's not a lot of lease, so I'm going to put this all the way to the bottom. We are using those newer bottles that we got, though. They're just screw caps. A lot of people have been asking about screw caps lately. Like, for some reason, they have the idea that they're not safe to use for bottling. I cannot agree with that statement. They're perfectly fine. There's no issue at all. Just a cost comparison real quick. This one has some raisins, Fleischmann's yeast, black tea, orange peel. It does not say what kind of honey, but I'm guessing probably the wildflower. So I know that stuff is about $60 for 12 pounds, right? So that's $5 a pound. We used 3 pounds to make this, so that's $15. Let's say I used, between the raisins and the yeast, call it $1, okay? The tea, let's say another $1. I mean, that's getting really crazy.
Yeah.
So let's even say another $1 with the orange peel. So $18 for 4 bottles of mead. That's about $4.50 a bottle of mead. I cannot buy mead for anything less than $20 to $30 a bottle where we live. And that's for not as good as this. I mean, it just won't be as good as this. It's like Chaucer's, which is like your standard, but even that's like $30 a bottle around here. So this is still way cheaper. Now, something I'd like to point out. This is Fleischmann's yeast. We always talk about flocculation and how it doesn't. I'm not getting a lot of wispies in here. There's a little bit, but it's not bad at all. This actually flocculated out really nice. You can see by the clarity. Hold one of those bottles up to show them. Look how clear that is. Anybody that ever tells you you can't use bread yeast to make mead, they're wrong.
Wrong, wrongity, wrong.
All right, so I got out my phone to show you the clarity in this. You know, everybody does the backlight thing. I just wanted you to see it. It doesn't show this super well, but this mead, I mean, I can see through it, okay? It's that kind of clear. And something else of note, this was, like I say, Fleischmann's bread yeast. This is something that people pick on others all the time, and we get slammed for this constantly. Because we say that bread yeast is okay to ferment with. Well, this went to 11.3%. It tastes good. What's the problem? Anyway, what's going to happen to these now? You're going to see a tasting in a couple of weeks because we're going to use this bottle up. I'll probably put it in the fridge and we'll drink this. We're going to put one of these away for a whole year and you'll get to see that in a year, how much better it gets. And the other two, I'm going to drink.
My first mead.
How's it taste? All right, so this is now in the bottle almost 2 months. And that's on purpose. A lot of people have been asking about it. I don't like to drink mead when it's too young. And this one I know is good at, a month or two. So we gave it a little bit of time and we've been busy, okay? However, that said, I have actually drank a bottle of this already. But I'm not going to let that change my judgment today. I'm going to be completely impartial. I almost got it out without laughing. All right, so first, this has been chilled, so you will see some misting in the glass.
Nice and clear.
It is super crystal clear. I mean, that is clarity to be jealous of.
And it's that beautiful golden ambery color, very reminiscent of honey, which primarily the main ingredient is honey.
We call this a traditional mead. Now, there's really no such thing as a traditional mead, okay? Mead was made all different kinds of ways by all different kinds of people, and they used whatever they had. Now, this one is basically just some raisins, a little bit of lemon zest, orange zest. Raisins, a little bit of orange zest, and honey. And that's about it. So there's really not a lot of, tea. We use tea in this too. So there should be a little bit of the sweetness of the raisin, the complexity of the raisin. That's where that color is coming from, is the raisins. The orange should give just a little bit of a citrus hit, and then the tea should give it some complexity and mouthfeel.
That said, everything that was added in small amounts, and it was just used to enhance the natural flavors found in the honey itself. So we're using it to make it a more complex beverage, but we still want it to be primarily honey forward.
And based on the smell alone, it totally is.
Yes. That's lovely.
This smells amazing. A lot of people talk about there's a few basic meads out there for recipes. And I made this one to be that. And personally, I feel this is a lot easier than some of the others out there. I'm not trying to trash anybody, but this is easier to make than some of the others. It's not as fiddly about certain things. And it's ready in like 4 weeks. It's good, really good after like 3 months, but it's ready in 4 weeks or so. Not that time should be your first factor when you're thinking about mead.
So aroma, you definitely get the honey, and then if you
slight
search
orange
for
tint.
it, you can get little residual of the other notes, like the orange.
I get a little bit of the
tea.
raisin.
Brian's getting a little bit of the raisin.
Yeah, raisins don't really do much other than add sweetness and complexity to a brew, and that's why we use them. I just like the way they tasted it. Okay, that's the short sip. Right off the bat. This is good. This is really good.
The reason why we take that quick first short sip is to get our palate acclimated to this particular beverage. So any harshness from the alcohol in particular, our body's going to be like, all right, I got that note now. I can move forward and find out what's actually represented in here.
Now, this is only 11.3%. I say only. Wines in general range from 9 to 14%, commercial wines. I consider mead to be a wine-like product, not exactly a wine. So it's right in that range. I also like my meads between 11 and 14% typically. 12 to 15, 11 to 15, somewhere in that is perfect. This is on the low end of that scale. I don't really taste alcohol. But what I do get is there's this tiny little taste that I get all the time from a naturally fermented honey in the back of my throat. It's almost a bitter flavor, but it's not objectionable. Just, you know, it's there. It's kind of like if you take extra virgin olive oil, you know it's the real stuff. When you get that little bitter flavor in the back, it actually adds to the experience for me. It doesn't take away. And this, I get that. I got a little bit of the citrus hit. I got a little bit of the raisin. The tea added a nice mouthfeel. Yeah, this is just good stuff.
Now I went ahead and took my longer sip while Brian was talking, so I already have my tasting notes from that. And I'm getting a little bit of the play on my tongue from, I'm going to attribute that from the alcohol and from the tea. It's almost similar to the sensation of clove, where it's kind of that
the numbing.
tingly, numbing combo. It's not overly strong. It's just interesting that I'm getting that from this, because I don't always get it from our meads. But then I'm definitely getting that rich depth of honey profile throughout it, and I really attribute that to the little bit of citrus in the tea and the raisin combination added to this. And I know I've said it before in talking about raisins. Raisins add this odd, unexplainable note that I have yet to properly describe, but I know when it's not present.
Yeah.
And so you can definitely tell that it's present in this, and it gives us that depth of flavor that otherwise wouldn't be there if they were absent.
The best statement I can make about this is the most complex, rich, simple mead you can get. There's not a lot in there, so everything has to be done just right. And that recipe, I've fine-tuned it over the years, so it's gotten better and better. Even though it's very, very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. What I get is the initial, like as it comes in, I get that burst of honey and orange, and it's just awesome right away. But it's not overly sweet either.
No, it's kind of like ripe fruit that's just ripe.
Yeah.
It's not overripe, it's just ripe, so it's that burst, like
but then
Brian was saying.
immediately the tannins of the tea take over and take the sweetness level down to something really like quite manageable. And then on the finish, it just like coats your mouth with this flavor that is that natural fermented honey thing, but I still get the richness of it as it's going down, and then breathing back and forth a few times for like 30 seconds after, I'm still kind of tasting that. That's complexity and depth of flavor, and that's what mead's all about. That's why people who really love mead, that's the kind of thing that they're looking for.
And I think it's the different levels that you get from this particular beverage that keeps my mind going back to whiskey, because I get those kind of different levels of experience when I'm drinking whiskey.
Absolutely. Especially like an Isla or something that's really aggressive and complicated.
But this doesn't have that in-your-face aggressive profile. It's much more...
This is very approachable.
Yeah.
Very approachable. I would pour a mug of this and sit by the TV or a fire and enjoy it.
Which he has.
Yes.
A whole bottle of it.
Yep. This is one of my favorite meads that we make, so it's not really a surprise. The fact that it's simple and we can promote it to people who've never made mead before should not take away from the fact that it's that good. Okay? That's what I want to make clear. We have to give this a score.
Okay.
So that means
I need
1
sip.
through 10. Do you need more? I can refill your glass. There's still a little bit left in the bottle. So 1 means you wouldn't serve it to your worst enemy. 10 means it's absolutely perfect. There's nothing to change. Let me know when you have a number in mind, and I'll do the countdown.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I think so.
1, 2, 3,
7.
9. That's right. I said 9. That's how much I like this. I can still see there's probably room for improvement. It's not perfect. That's why I say 9, even though it's one of my favorites of all time. She doesn't like it as much as I do.
I don't know what I would do to improve it. So if it was judging specifically on what would you do to improve it, then I would score it much higher. It's just my personal preferences.
Yeah, she likes things a little more fruity than I do.
Yeah.
I like a simpler, more straight mead. Or I like it really fruity. One of the two. It really depends on my mood. But this one and the spiced metheglin, I'll reach for either of those any given day of the week. Those would be the two that I would go to.
Where I typically go towards the wines
the blueberries and the red stuff.
Yeah.
See, everybody makes fun of me for all my red meats, but they're not even the ones that I reach
fault.
for. They're not even the ones I go for. Personally, I just think this is awesome. If you have yet to make this mead, please go do it. And if you like this video, just look up right there. There's another one for you to watch.